What's up, folks? So this video is actually going to be two topics in one. I think I have the very first ever World of Warcraft achievement, and I'm going to explain what it is, and you guys can decide if I'm right or wrong. But first, I need to set the stage, talk a little bit about my experience playing WoW in its very first days and weeks in 2004. And if you played then, you're going to remember some of this. And if not, I hope you'll at least think that it's interesting to hear some of what it was like. So my retail main, Drunk Jeff, was rolled 11/23/04 on Suramar. And I remember that day really well. I was driving home from visiting my mother in Palm Springs, and I was like entering my 30s, I'll call it. So you guys can do some math and know I'm a little bit older than most of you WoW players. And at that time, I was a Warcraft 3 player, and I was sort of interested in WoW because the trailers were awesome. But I kept thinking, this game's not for me. I like RTS games. I'm not going to play WoW. But for some reason, I changed my mind on that drive. I went to CompUSA. I got the box and the discs, and this is that exact box, and it still has the discs and the bag in it and everything else, or the book. And I started playing WoW late that night. And like so many others, I became addicted to this damn game more than anything else ever before or since in my life. And that's not an exaggeration or hyperbole. It was literally an unhealthy addiction. I was playing for all hours. I was suffering from lack of sleep. I have these very distinct and great memories of every Friday in those first months, racing home from work, jumping on the PC at 5 or 6 p.m. And as the hours went by through the night, I'd watch the clock, and at exactly 5:55 a.m., I'd rush out of my condo, across the parking lot to the 7-Eleven across the street, and it opened at 6 and not 7 for some reason. And I'd get a breakfast sandwich and a coffee. I'd rush back and play until sometime Saturday evening when I'd crash out after being awake for like 40 hours. And I knew it was unhealthy, but it was just so fun. And by the way, it was very hard to play during those first weeks because the game was just super buggy. You'd lag out and weird things would happen. The bosses would just freeze and you'd have to start dungeons over. Our servers were constantly going down, like so much so that when you looked at your billing history in those days, we all got like a whole bunch of single day credits on our bill. And that was all really because, as I understand it, Blizzard just had absolutely no concept of how popular the game was going to be, and they were just completely overwhelmed. So, because of my play schedule, I leveled very, very quickly, and I found myself among the first groups of the highest level players on Suramar. So, I was fortunate to get to join groups that were just trying to scrape together enough high level players to do the highest dungeons. And I remember distinctly just a couple of weeks in, people talking about, hey, a new dungeon came out today. It's Maradon, and I was like a level 46 or something, and we had one level 50 in our group, a paladin named Slato, and we were able to complete that dungeon on day one. And I know I was in some of the very first solo rance runs that were being farmed by another mage named Snowflake on that server, who became the server's first level 60. I was recruited into the very first UBRS run with a player named Elvstrium, who was very first to get the key quest done. I know I joined the first MC attempts on that server. They were put together by a player named Griffin. And get this, this was around maybe late January, early February 2005, and there was no teleporting into MC. So we steamrolled through all of BRD in our 40-man raid to get to MC through the Rio portal that's down there. And yeah, at that time, you could zone into any dungeon with up to 40 people. And we got in there. There's no Ventrilo yet, so we're just typing in chat, and like we were clueless. I know that we wiped to the first set of Fire Lords by being overwhelmed by their spawns on like the second pole. And I remember we were killing trash, and it was lots of Molten Giants, and we got further down in there, and there was a mob named Molten Destroyer, and we thought, okay, it's a boss because it had a different name, and we just didn't know. So I had a good amount of tier 0 gear at that time, but for some reason my tier 0 chest was the Devout Priest, the priest version, and it didn't matter because at that time the graphics for the tier pieces hadn't been added to the game yet. So you just had this weird like placeholder chest, and it was as if maybe Blizzard didn't expect folks to get to that point as quickly as they did. So we're all running around MC in our ugly orange robes. And it was like that until March 7th, 2005, when they finally updated the textures and we could look like we were supposed to look. And incidentally, that was the same day they added the guy down there that ports you directly into MC, and they added caps on the number of players that could enter dungeons. So by that time, I joined the best raiding guild on the server. We were called No Quarter, and we were led by these two funny guys named Mac and Mute. And they were like old EQ players, and they really understood how to play the game, and we ended up doing really well. We got a lot of server first, and it was just an awesome time to play the game. I was playing a lot, and one of the things I was very proud of was the fact that I was able to farm and save up enough gold to get my level 60 epic mount fairly quickly after hitting 60. And at that time, saving up 1,000 gold was like no small feat. It was, the economy was really weird, and we didn't understand how gold farms worked, and it was just this grind. And when you went to buy one of those level 60 mounts, except for being slightly different colors, they were indistinguishable from the regular level 40 mounts. And at least the human mounts, there were only two epic mounts, the Palomino and the White Stallion. So like I was all in on my mage and wizard style of character, and we were right in the midst of the three Lord of the Rings movies coming out, and I really liked Gandalf and Shadowfax, so of course I chose the White Stallion. Well, we didn't know it at the time, but like the Tier 0 gear, Blizzard intended the epic horses and the other mounts for the other factions to look more epic, and these were only placeholder graphics. So 4.5 months into the game, on April 8th, 2005, in patch 1.4, Blizzard updated all of the epic mounts to the armored versions that we have today. And for humans and maybe other races, they actually added one or two more variations. And on that date, the White Stallion that I had was removed from the game and replaced with the armored Swift White Steed. And the same thing happened to all the other class type mounts across the game. So if you went to buy the mounts after that, you'd see the new upgraded versions in place of the old simpler mounts. And for players like me that had already purchased the early version of the mount vendor had a new quest that allowed you to exchange your simple epic mount for any of the new versions, which of course most players did right away because, we were excited about the new looks. They had glowing eyes and cool armor, and it was something that looked clearly different and allowed you to really show off the fact that you had your epic mount. And I remember riding to that mount vendor, looking at the new mounts, and almost completing that quest, and then saying, I'm just going to hold on to my simple White Stallion for a little while. And I continued using it for weeks, then months, then years, and more I'd get asked about, well, how'd you get that mount? Or maybe players that knew what was up would say they wish they'd kept theirs, and I was always very proud to have it. And even though I've long retired my retail character, I play Classic now, it's always remained my main ground mount. Now, years after those mount changes, when Wrath launched on October 14th, 2008, and with that patch 3.0.2, the achievement system also launched. And anything you had already completed as of that date was simply given the achievement system launch date as its completion date, 10/15/2008. So they were all kind of like equal in terms of when you'd got them, those early achievements. And one of the achievements I got, which was later retitled as a feat of strength, was Old School Ride, owner of one of the original epic mounts that are no longer attainable, and it was listed with that same date, 10/15/2008. But we know from the date of this mount change patch 1.4.0 that you must have bought that original mount or one of the original mounts April 7th, 2004 or prior, and then chosen, of course, not to turn it in for the upgrade. So for that reason, I'm calling this the first ever WoW achievement. I'm not aware of anything else in the game that is provable of having been accomplished at an earlier date. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Is that the very first ever WoW achievement, or did I miss something that's maybe earlier? You can decide and let me know. And, as you can tell, I have this high regard for WoW history and the early days of WoW. So if you have any similar memories, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. If you made it this far and watched, I appreciate it very much. Thanks. Cheers, folks.